Welcome everybody to the session. I'd like to quickly take you through an experience of what it is to be part of the business school at SBS at a glance. The mission of SBS is quite simple. It's service to society by developing virtuous leaders, by providing world-class executive education, management education in a local setting. To achieve this mission and vision, we definitely have a few things that we have to consider: the experienced faculty, the professionalism of the team, learner-centered approach, unmatched learning ambience. When you visit the business school, the ambience is quite unmatched. Quality, relevance. These are part of the factors that we do consider when you come and you have an experience with us at Strathmore University Business School. All this comes in place to just give you a world-class executive management setting while you're here in Kenya. Virtue and excellence are some of the key things that we consider in our day-to-day at the Strathmore Business School. Of course, the departments under Strathmore Business School, there's executive education for executives like you who are joining into this call. If you want to go through development courses for yourself, academic programs from masters to the PhD programs, and of course the undergraduate in business, and of course research hubs that are involved in the day-to-day research, the research and investigating real-time industry experience that is documented in research. For the executive programs, we definitely have leadership programs for those in senior management, middle management, board level, C-suite, all come in the corporate governance programs. With all our programs, we embed a lot of coaching to guide you and walk with you through the journey. Public policy, which we are dealing with today, public policy executive programs, healthcare programs, sustainability programs, data science and analytics, entrepreneurship for SMEs and MSMEs, and of course, custom solutions whereby we listen to what the organization wants and we develop courses that are relevant and up to date and industry relevant for you to grow and develop in your organization. For the public policy programs, we have public policy executive program, which basically is just guides in the public policy and development of public policy. Public-private partnerships, how do we engage in public-private engagements, civic engagements? How do we work together both as public, private, and private to just ensure delivery at its best? ICT is very key, most especially now during COVID. We have definitely have to rotate around ICT in public policy. Of course, African Sustainability Executive Program, and then the Shared Value Executive Program. All these are under the public policy and sustainability programs where this, what we're having a discussion about today, falls under. Of course, a few housekeeping guidelines for us. The Q&A session is available for us to chat and interact. You can ask as many questions as possible in the Q&A section. And of course, the chat section is also available for those who have comments and random discussion pointers that you want to share with us. The session is being recorded and the recording will be shared with all the participants and those who may not have the chance to attend today's session. So it will be fully recorded and delivered to the participants. With that, I hope you have an experience of what it means to be part of Strathmore Business School, and we're looking forward to the great engagements and the amazing speakers that are with us here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I believe that's my cue to kick off today's session. Welcome from Nairobi, Strathmore University Business School, for all our distinguished guests and everyone joining us from different parts of the world. My name is Martin Baya. I'll be your moderator for today's session, which we anticipate will be very insightful, very impactful, and we hope that it'll have some use to each of you who's joining us today. Our topic for today is entrenching a culture of ethics in public service. And we have an esteemed panel that will engage us today and anchor a very, very strong set of keynote speakers whom I shall get an opportunity to introduce you to. I'll begin off by inviting our Executive Dean, Dr. George Njenga, to provide some background and welcoming remarks, after which Dr. Njenga, I shall have the opportunity to invite our two keynotes, Madam Emily Kamau, who is representing the Director of Public Prosecutions, and Miss Lucy Kinuthia, who is representing the CEO at EACC. Dr. Njenga, without further ado, karibu sana. Oh, you're muted, Dr. Njenga, you're muted.
Technology.
Yes, we can hear you now.
It may help us in solving ethical, or rather promoting ethical culture, I think. First, I want to thank you, Martin, Joyce, Daniel, and the team, Carol Munene, behind the scenes for coordinating this. Well done. I'm really glad you've touched my heart by setting this up, for the simple reason that although my area is leadership and governance in public sector and political governance, ethics plays a central role in it. So you have touched me directly. And normally I would be playing golf at this time, but I've decided to forget about golf and coming here with joy. Dear guest speakers, we have Madam Emily Kamau, the Deputy Director, Economic and Organized International Crime. I'm glad to have worked with the UN in this area, and I realized just how important it is for us to have some form of management of that sector. You all know about the infiltration of corruption and crime from the point of view of terrorism. It's a very important area. Madam, is it, let me see, Madam Miriam Olo.
Yeah. No, we have Lucy Kinuthia. Lucy Kinuthia representing.
Okay, Madam Lucy Kinuthia, indeed. Madam Lucy Kinuthia, sorry for not remembering you. Please welcome to this guest speaker series. I will also remember that we have Dr. Kibua, who is also a guest speaker, our senior faculty here at Strathmore. I will also note the panelists, Wajiro, Madam Emily Kamau, and the Deputy Director of Public Prosecution. Thank you for being there. Forgive me for not remembering all of you. Dr. Miriam Orio Omolo. That one I think I got for the panelists, founder of APRI and direct. Well done. The question we are discussing here is critical, but rarely do we understand just how critical it is from the perspective of sustaining a country and a community. We have very many laws. If I recall, we have the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission Act of 2011, the Public Procurement and Disposal Act of 2005, the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2009, the Leadership and Integrity Act of 2012, the Elections Act of 2020, the Legal Assistant Act of 2011, the Commission on Administration of Justice, Fair and Administrative Action, and a plethora of other laws, and obviously not forgetting the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission that governs our promotion of ethics. I actually think that it is wrong to think of this in a negative way, so to speak, or reactionary way, which I think is what we have done. For instance, we say Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Yet, what we should be promoting is the greatness of ethics. It's like a child. If you take a child and you show them the beauty of playing a certain game, or of doing a certain action, or being kind, or of being considerate, or taking second place, or sharing, the best way is not to wait until they make a mess, then you beat them. The best way is to show that child the beauty and the glory of virtuous actions. And in a sense, it would be sad that very frequently in our society, we think of this in a negative way or reactionary way. so that you are ethical if you don't fall into the ethics and anti-corruption law. The second point I want to say is the governance structure of ethics. Again, it's a plethora of laws, of penalties and imprisonment for unethical action, which is also true because we need a certain punishment of the ethical or lack of it thereof, punishment of lack of ethics. But again, by doing that, you equalize the one who is really going out of their way to develop an ethics and governance structure that is sustainable, and he or she who is barely living the law. They are actually even sometimes corrupt, but since they are shrewd players in the environment, they are never caught. So let me go to the third point. The third point, my dear ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to the discussion of ethics or lack of it, or what we call corruption, is to understand the meaning of it from a moral perspective. So at this stage, you have already left the discussion of personal ethics, that is the morality of the individual action, which is the center of formation in the family and the center of formation in our educational system. And here we develop a virtuous character. So the point is, first of all, we have to look at our institutional development of ethics in the family and in the institutions of education and technical capacities. What do I mean? I mean that there you must laud ethical behavior, you must laud the way you set up a sustainable governance structure, you must laud the way we praise and form other colleagues of ours within the profession through professional bodies. This is fundamental, in my humble opinion. Now comes the time the child goes and is, after this beautiful system of family and education institution, is thrown into service to society through private sector and public sector. And today we are discussing public sector. So who governs the public sector ethics and anti-corruption? Well, if you look at all those laws I have said, ultimately you will come to the deputy public prosecutor. You will see the integrated system of the police. There you have the National Intelligence Services. There you have the prisons. There you have the administrative police. There you have the National Intelligence Service, NIS itself. There you have the military for the international crime and the local crime. And within it, you have a significant, again, structure of intelligence that must be coordinated for the sake of security and for the sake of defense. So you ask yourself, if finally all these things will coalesce under His Excellency, the President's office, how do you discuss that complexity? How do you bring it about? And I leave it to you because, well, we can keep on adding laws and adding procedures and adding systems of anti-corruption without looking at the big picture. Now, my final discussion with you is the following. We are discussing the common good of a country and a people, our culture. So ultimately, the question is, what culture are we building? Because ethics is love. It is going out to create a better world for others. It's leaving a legacy. So it's really out of the purview of law, although the law helps us to govern it, just like a mother will have a law in the house for the children and the father. But that is not what you want them to live. You want them to be creative, to be innovative, to be, and so on and so forth. So, dear panelists, dear speakers, I'm sorry for having taken some of these ideas, but I thought it was good to frame the thought so that when we discuss it with our colleagues who are listening now, I see we have people from all over the society, we may really give a good direction towards the promotion of ethical culture and work and professionalism and love and the love for one's country. May I leave it there and say thank you very much for coming, and you dear delegates who are listening and participants, please join in when it is the right time to give a solution so that we just don't talk. We are going to move this to the next level. Thank you very much. Bwana Martin Baya, asante, karibu.
Thank you very much, Dr. Njenga, an Aristotelian. So in terms of ethical perspectives and background. And I think you've done a fantastic job laying a foundation for this entire conversation from an academic perspective. I'll want to invite our first keynote speaker, but I've heard you talk about 6 things. You said there are many laws and you tabulated them, which are the purview of some of the speakers we'll hear from today. You talked about this idea of not punishing, but helping one to act ethically. You talked about governance of ethics. You talked about understanding ethics from a moral perspective, the family and the education system. You also talked about institutions that exist, particularly in the context of Kenya, and summarized them. And then finished off with this challenge or closing thought. What culture are we building? A perspective of law versus love. Asante sana, Dr. Njenga, which makes an excellent segue as I invite our first keynote. We'll have Madam Emily Kamau, and she's representing Mr. Nurdin Haji, the Director of Public Prosecutions. Madam Kamau works within the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, based in the Office of the Attorney General, where she's a Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions, specifically focused on economic, international, and organized crime, and the perspective of anti-corruption more broadly. She's worked for more than 20 years in this context, and for the last 15 years, she's been focused on anti-corruption work. She started off with the Office of the Attorney General within the Office of the DPP, and proceeded to the Kenya Anti-Corruption Authority between 1991, 2001, subsequently defunct. She prosecuted several corruption cases, and she's represented the Director of Public Prosecutions in various anti-corruption fora within Kenya and internationally, specifically in the implementation of the UN Convention Against Corruption. So we are extremely pleased to have you, Madam Emily Kamau, and I invite you to share with us your perspective for the next 15 minutes. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, all participants. Like you've been told, my name is Emily Kamau, Deputy Director, representing the Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Nurdin Haji, who have given his apologies. He would have loved to be with you, but something urgent came up. Like you've been told, I've been in this office for quite some time. You've been told about my history in dealing with the anti-corruption work. I'm glad to hear Dr. Kibua again. I had the first anti-corruption presentation from him when I was very new in the anti-corruption, when he talked about the public service. When I was being introduced, there was talking about the Office of the AG and the Office of the ODPP. Just to make it straight, the Office of the DPP was birthed in the Office of the AG. It used to be a department within the Office of the AG, but now it's an independent office in the set up by the Constitution. I have a presentation which was prepared by Mr. Nurdin Haji. I'll take you through, but I'll give my input during the plenary. There is a paper. I don't know whether there was a screen where we could share, but since it's quite big, I'll try to kind of summarize it. And here it is. The relation, first of all, the entrenching ethics into public service. we have some subheadings which I'll read and it will guide us. The relationship between the public sector and ethics. First of all, as early as the 1970s, the need for entrenchment of ethics in the public service was identified. You all know about the Degwa Commission, which was from 1970 to 1971. It made certain recommendations in regard to the civil servants. Some of the recommendations included introduction of registration to define responsibilities and functions of the civil servants in detail, including recommendation that public servants should adhere to a code of conduct. Even from what you've just discussed as we start this session, you've heard that we've got registration. We can talk about the 2003 Public Officers Ethics Act. I did not go into details. And then we also have the code of conduct for all the government institutions. Then we have the ASECA, we call it the ASECA, the Anti-Corruption Economic Crimes Act, which criminalizes some of the breaches of ethics and other criminal offenses, which we use to prosecute corruption and economic crime cases. 2010, we got all the other registration that is under the Constitution. We have Article 10, which provides for national values and principles of governance to include good governance, integrity, transparency, accountability. These values and principles of governance are binding on all state organs, state officers, and public officers. These are further expounded in Article 232 of the Constitution. We also have the Leadership and Integrity Act, which provides that a state officer is a possession of public trust, and the authority and responsibility vested in the state officer shall be exercised by the state officer in the best interest of the people of Kenya. Now, like somebody just said, I can't remember, he was called, is it Dr. Jenga, that we have more than enough registration. Maybe during this session, we'll be asking ourselves, why with all these registrations, we are where we are, with so many offenses, so many high personalities, state officers and public officers being charged with crimes left, right, and center. Maybe that is one of the questions we will be asking ourselves. In the presentation, we have characteristics of good governance. Since it's there, I know we all know them, but I'll just run through them. They include adherence to the rule of law, accountability, transparency, integrity, equitable and inclusivity, and participatory. What is the importance of having an effective culture of ethics in public service? First and foremost, and somebody have just alluded to it just now, smooth delivery of services. And what we witness today, these are my own comments. Is that what we are witnessing today? Currently, we have big lines of persons waiting to be served in the public office services. And then we still have absenteeism from workplace that really frustrate the citizens when they are seeking services from the government. The other importance is promote effective governance and effective citizenship due to application of and confidence in due process, encourages growth of the country due to the fact that resources will be channeled to the places that they are supposed to go, upholds the rule of law as a result of effective transparency and accountability mechanism, increases trust of citizens in the government. Maybe as we go on, we'll be asking ourselves what we've been seeing as far as this is concerned. The other area that we had been tasked to look at is the threats and challenges facing the maintenance of ethical and integrity at the national and administrative level. We have the institutional culture of organizations where petty corruption is abated. We can look at this where we have the petty corruption, which has been seen as a way of life. We have like an example which I've seen with so many complaints coming to this office. We have like the land boards committees, the ones who give consent maybe for sale or subdivision of land. We have the chief offices. In some years past, at the immigration offices, it was the order of the day, like if you were to get a passport, you'd have to bribe your way around. And also in so many other offices, I've just picked some areas which it was notorious, and everybody knew that if you are to go there, you are supposed to part with something small before you got those services. I've quoted the land boards because even as recent as when we are still having these COVID problems, I received a lot of complaints that before you get consent for subdivision of land or for sale of land, you had to part with a minimum of 2,000. So those are areas where the way of life is this petty corruption is abated because people just have to part with it before they get the services. Then we have the other challenges, the extreme greed by public officers, which leads to illicit enrichment. Why we have put this there is that one reason why people engage in corruption, it's just sheer greed, because we have very poor people who are still working in the public service and they do not engage in corrupt activities. And we have some people with very high salaries, but they still engage in corruption. Then we have our society, glorification of unethical conduct. We all appreciate that civil servants cannot be viewed independent of the society. Indeed, it's a reflection of the society itself. So what the society expects, for instance, if you're in a position, you are able to get them something out of the office in which you are in. For instance, you get their children into various places, you get them tenders and all that. So the person, the civil servant, get the pressure from the society itself to engage in corruption. Then the other challenge is lack of exemplary leadership and lack of staff discipline. Then we have interference of public offices in accountability procedures. Maybe this is probably due to patronage. If somebody feels that they are the ones who placed in that position, then you ought to give back. They need, whenever they want to get something from that office, you are the one to do it for them. Then we have the weak supervision and monitoring of ethics processes. I think that is within the offices themselves. Lack of integrity testing tools and mechanisms. Public apathy and unawareness by citizens relating to unethical conduct. For example, bribery. I've talked about the bribery again, big and small. And that is despite the registration we've been told, including the Bribery Act 2016. Then we had another heading, common areas of unethical conduct in public service. We have the conflict of interest and self-servicing interest. In the type of cases that we are prosecuting, we are seeing quite a lot of conflict of interest, even including in the cases regarding senior people, like even governors. I'm not going into details because those cases are in court, whereby somebody registered a company through proxies, and then the tenders are given to that company. But you find that at the end of the day, the money paid to that company will go round and round and get into the accounts of those persons who are in public office, not necessarily governors. I use governors as just an example. For the cases which we have in court, which are in the public domain, we also have other public servants, big and small, or even other state officers who have been charged with conflict of interest. That is, they are still in public service. They are not even trading with the government. a directory, that is, the company might not be in their name, but you see that the trail of money will add in their own accounts. So there is quite a lot in regard to the conflict of interest. Then other areas, creation of ghost projects, payroll, and others. These are just meant to pocket resources. Then we have the failure to comply with procurement laws and procedures, involving spending more than necessary on goods and services, and picking companies outside of compliance with the laws. This is if we are talking about laws of government money, this is the worst area, that is procurement, public procurement. We have instances where hundreds of millions and millions are paid, but there are no services that have been rendered, or no goods have been supplied, or substandard services have been rendered, or whatever is supplied does not reach the standard that it's supposed to be, and that is intended. That kind of procurement is intended just to siphon monies out of government coffers. And sometimes people challenge me, or us who are in the ODPP, asking us, why do we charge people with just breach of procurement laws? In fact, I've had my learned colleagues in court asking, you are just charging my client with just breach of procurement laws. But to you, who we are here, let us know that these are the gates for which the government monies and the funds are lost. Because once a procurement goes through and all the laws are not followed, or just a few are not followed, it will give birth to what is called the loss of public monies. It's just lost through by failing to follow the Public Procurement and Disposal Act, as well as Public Finance and Management Act. Then we have the abuse of office. Abuse of office is whereby the officer who is in government refuses or blatantly fails to adhere to the given guidelines or given regulations and does something arbitrarily. And this ends up with the government losing money. In abuse of office offense, we must have the government losing in order for us to charge somebody, because either that person abuses his office to personally gain or to enable another person gain. And I've told you, you might not find the public servant gaining, but if you follow the money, you will see at the end tail, the person is getting the money back. It will go round and round through so many accounts, but at some point you'll get. Even if you don't find him in the what you call follow the money trail, you'll find that this person is having what we call unexplained assets. This is maybe a junior person and the type of cars they are driving. Recently, you had even were they a receptionist who used to fly a chopper from his home to the office. So such things are great pointers. They are red flags of corruption. Then we have the receiving of gifts, which are not allowed by law. So I'm talking about the common areas of unethical conduct in public service. The other one is failure to facilitate open and democratic processes, failure to ensure accountability, use of nepotism and ethnicity preferences in recruitment. Recruitment is a very bad area, because you'll find that maybe even in certain organizations, and more so, these are great problem in the county offices, that you find everybody is related to the person who is in power. We have a case in point which we are prosecuting, where even witnesses cannot testify, because you find that the person who is being prosecuted is their uncle. So even if they are removed from office, they will still not agree to testify against that person. Then there is irregular expenditure on things like transport, hotels, trips abroad, or even locally. This is in the area of per diem, the daily rates that persons are given. You've had cases, or even a very senior person having taken hundreds of thousands or even more than $1 million for an arranged trip abroad, which they never took. This is also another area that unethical conduct is witnessed in public service. I hope you are still together. Maybe somebody should be coughing to know that I'm not alone. Now the other,
yes,
okay,
madam.
thank you. Thank you.
We're still together.
You know, I'm in office alone and I'm
Okay,
not hearing any sound. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's okay. We actually have about maybe 2 more minutes and we will be able to hear from Ms. Kinusi.
Wow. So the role of the ODPP, I won't go so much into that because we know we are the prosecutors. We take those people who have been accused of unethical conduct, which amounts to criminal offenses. We charge them. And I've told you some of the examples of the offenses that we charge. They include abuse of office, conspiracy to defraud, because you get outsiders and insiders in the office conspiring to siphon out government funds. Then I've told you about the breach of procurement procedures and public finance management laws. Then we have what we call illegal fraudulent acquisition of public property. Then another area we to point out, it might look simple to outsiders, but we really witnessed it after 2010 Constitution, faking of the certificates. So the universities should really check this area, because we have got several cases in court where some people got their jobs or promotion using fake certificate, and you see that they are from, some of them are fake from even our national universities, Nairobi, Kenyatta, and Egerton, and so many others. And then maybe, since I've been told that we've got a few minutes, I would wish to tell you that currently we have a total of 135 high impact cases which are pending before court as of 30th June 2020. How we consider case to be high impact, it's the amount involved, that is one criteria. Then the personalities involved, they could be senior government officials, or it's a case of great public interest. Additionally, there are 53 corruption cases and corruption cases involved. Also have what were called the ministers before 2010, principal secretaries, governors, members of members of parliament. We also have county government officials, and we also have several cases involving junior public officers. These cases are ongoing. I would like to just highlight a few cases which I know you are very familiar with. Recently, we have the 2018 ACC number 31 of 2018, Republic versus Grace Sarape Wakungu and John Koyi Waluke and Erad Supplies and General Contractors Limited. The accused persons were convicted of fraudulent acquisition of public property in June 2010, but they have appealed. I think they are outside on bail pending appeal. We have cases related to governors. We have the Saburu governor, Nairobi County governor, Kiambu County governor, and Tharaka-Nithi. And then we have the case related to the Cabinet Secretary, Treasury, Republic versus Henry Rotich, and others. All of them involved fraudulent acquisition of public property. Now, we were supposed to, those are the cases that we are having. I have just highlighted a few. They are ongoing. I think I'll get a chance maybe to talk about the challenges we've been having in prosecuting those cases. And then we are also supposed to comment on how to strengthen ethical competence of the public service. One of from the presentation by the DPP, promote respect for the rule of law, implementation of the whistleblower protection law, because public service employees are crucial source of information about unethical conduct in government, and perform a valuable public service when they speak out. Passage of conflict of interest bill. I think the bill is already publicized. There have been stakeholders forums. That is a conflict of interest bill and lifestyle audit bill. Development of clear guidance for the interaction between the public and the private sector. Training on unethical standard should be carried out. Strengthening of the ombudsman for the issues of maladministration. Then with supervision, also the rewarding, because we always talk about the discipline and all that, but we do not talk about the our rewarding system. There is the continued sensitization, training and sensitization that have been ongoing, like the one at the Kenya School of Government. I am sure even the Strathmore Business School is offering such trainings. That is like the senior management courses and strategic leadership programs. Then the development of stringent accountability mechanism to prevent a lead and state capture by private actors. Regulation of possible areas of unfair commercial advantage caused by revolving door phenomenon. Citizen engagement in entrenchment of ethical values. For instance, reporting bribery requests and tendering malpractices. Independent law enforcing agencies. Merit-based public appointment. Increase in transparency and accountability in governance processes, such as allowing the review of official decisions, as establishing and monitoring reporting mechanism. I don't know how much more time I have.
I think we've probably gone over the 2 minutes so that we can give Ms. Kinuthia a perspective. But if you have one final thought, just in the next 30 seconds or 1 minute.
Okay, maybe I'll just go to the conclusion because I think I still have time to comment. Public service is a reflection of the ethical atmosphere of our society. Thus, as custodians of public trust, the public service should be held to utmost accountability of the behavior and ethical conduct of its officers. This is important since public service plays a critical role in the attainment of Vision 2030 and the development of Kenya. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Madam Kamau. You've actually covered quite a bit that will give the panelists an opportunity to respond. You've talked about going as far back as the Ndegwa Commission in '74. You've discussed various legislation. With all this legislation, where are we here? You've talked about threats and challenges. You've discussed in fairly great detail common areas of unethical behavior, and you've given actual examples of cases. And then you've also talked about, in your conclusion, this idea that accountability is key. And for the panelists, as you prepare for your comments a little bit later, you'll have an opportunity to build on that. And then also, thank you for that pointer. The Office of the Director of Public Prosecution is independent on the basis of Article 157 of the Constitution. In a previous time, it was within the Office of the Attorney General. So thank you very much, Madam Kamau, and we'll come back to you. Following that, it's my privilege and pleasure to invite Ms. Lucy Kinuthia, who's representing Mr. Twalib Mbarak, the CEO of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, EACC. Ms. Kinuthia is the director in charge of ethics and leadership within that particular directorate, where she oversees implementation of Chapter 6 of the Constitution, which has provisions on the leadership and integrity, and which has been brought into life through the Leadership and Integrity Act. She joined EACC in 2005. At that time, it was known as the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission under Justice Ringera. And she's the first director who's been working on these aspects of ethics and leadership, where with her team, She's been able to develop the leadership and integrity regulations, bringing the act to life. So she's been with the EACC for 15 years. And in her role, she has represented the CEO, Bwana Mbarak, in various fora in Kenya and internationally. So Ms. Kinuthia, we are delighted to have you here. The floor is yours. You have 15 minutes. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much, Martin. Good afternoon, viewers. So as you have heard, my name is Lucy Kinuthia, and I'm the Director in charge of Ethics and Leadership. I'm representing the Commission CEO and Secretary. Sorry, I hope you can hear me. Let me just...
Yes, we
can hear you, Lucy.
Deal with
we
the
can
volume.
see you.
I hope
But
you
we
can
can't see you.
Very much.
Yes.
You can't see me?
We can see you. We can see you.
You
I
can't
can't
see me?
see myself. I don't know.
That's okay, Madam Kamau. We can see you also.
Okay.
No, I wanted to see Lucy.
Okay. Karibu, Lucy.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope Joyce is going to host. I had a presentation from Tuali.
Yes, that'll be coming up shortly. Caroline is just about to project that. Caroline,
Okay.
you have the EACC presentation.
Yeah, so viewers, I'm representing the CEO of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. He sent his apologies, and apparently he's also a parent of Strathmore. And let me just thank the Strathmore Business School right from the onset for organizing this forum. Actually, these are the kind of forums and conversations that we should be having as a nation, especially given the times that we are facing. So that is the presentation in front of you. And basically what I'll be looking at is really the existing legal environment and what the EACC is doing with that, within that legal environment. Madam Emily Kamau has covered quite a bit in terms of economic crimes and a bit of an ethical conduct, so I'll not be going in that to avoid any repetition. But I'll be covering, say, like some of the strategies as a commission we employ in terms of just monitoring and enforcing matters, ethics and integrity, and then some of the gaps, and then proposals in terms of what we are doing as a commission. So that is outline, the second slide. I have an introduction, the legal framework, the role of the EACC. What are the challenges? I'll be covering some of the challenges as Dr. Jenga was bringing out. What is the problem with the law? We have so many laws, so what is the problem? The strategies, the key actors, how they can come on board, individual responsibilities, and then conclusion. Now to lay the groundwork is, I brought in a slide on the Great Wall of China. And I think most of us have heard about the Great Wall of China, where it is said that in the ancient days, the Chinese people wanted security against their neighbors, the fierce neighbors in the north. So they built a very high wall, and they believed it was very high, that nobody could climb over it or break it. But then again, we are told that during the first 100 years of the war's existence, China was invaded 3 times. And we are further told that not once did the neighbors break down the wall or climb over it. So each time they bribed those charged with the responsibility of guarding the gates, and they marched right through. So basically we are seeing that the Chinese relied on the walls of stone and overlooked personal integrity as a key factor. And I just wanted to lay the groundwork in terms of the critical role of ethics and integrity that ethics and integrity should play in a society. And we need to ask ourselves whether the many statutes, the many laws that we have are the walls of stones that we are focusing on at the expense of focusing on personal integrity and ethics as a key factor. So that was just to lay the groundwork. Now, in terms of institutionalizing ethics in the public service, the legal framework is very elaborate. We have the Constitution 2010, Article 10, the National Values, Chapter 6, Leadership and Integrity. I'll be talking slightly more on that. And then we have the Principles of Public Service and Article 232, which is enforced by the Public Service Commission, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Economic Crimes, which provides for economic crimes. The Leadership and Integrity Act, basically it provides for the Leadership and Integrity Code for state officers and for public officers. And we have the Bribery Act, the Public Officers Ethics Act, which provides for declaration of income, assets, and liabilities. I'll be talking about that shortly. And then the Bribery Act, which provides for the private sector to put in place certain measures to prevent corruption. And then we have the Public Service Values and Principles Act, which was enacted in 2017 and is administered by the Public Service Commission, as I've said. In terms of the mandate, the Commission's mandate is very broad, but we can categorize it into three broad thematic areas. We have the law enforcement, which really entails investigations, asset tracing. We do a lot of asset tracing and asset recovery. Disruption, we have done a lot of disruption of corruption networks undercover, and then ethics enforcement. Then in corruption prevention, there's corruption risk assessments. We undertake systems examinations. I will elaborate slightly on that in my next slide. Then there's promotion of ethics and leadership. And then we do a lot of public education and awareness. And I know we have interacted with Strathmore quite a bit on this. We do trainings not only for the public sector, but we have a whole department that undertakes sensitization, members of the public, so that we can also bring them on board in terms of supporting the war against corruption. Very many media outreach programs. And we also have integrity clubs. These are actually school-based because that should also be the focus in terms of enhancing ethics and integrity. So in terms of institutionalizing ethics in the public service, we undertake criminal investigations for corrupt conduct, ethics investigations as well into ethical breaches by public officers. And usually we make recommendations for administrative action, or like what Madam Emily has said, where there's culpability in terms of breach of the law, then the files are forwarded to DPP. Then we have the codes of conduct, which we oversight in terms of every institution coming up with codes. We monitor compliance. The Commission also undertakes integrity vetting of public appointments under Chapter 6 of the Constitution, capacity building, very many of those, corruption risk assessment for public entities, integrity programs, and career support materials. We have come up with quite a bit. Wealth declaration by public officers. We have a National Integrity Academy, which is really the training arm of the Commission in terms of specialized anti-corruption and ethics and integrity training. And we have the Kenya Leadership and Integrity Forum, which will be key in terms, of bringing other sectors of the society on board in enhancing ethics and integrity and the fight against corruption. Now, the next slide basically now elaborates what I was bringing out, and I don't think I want to go so much into this in terms of high impact investigations, because I think Emily has covered that. Asset tracing, this is an area that we are focusing on because the strategy is if we can get what a public officer has corruptly acquired, then that would be deterrent. So we are putting a lot of focus in terms of asset tracing and asset recovery. I didn't come with the figures, but this is an area that we are making very good progress as a country, because then it's deterrent. Ethics compliance, I just wanted to emphasize something here, and I think Madam Emily talked about this. We are very saddened as a commission because we are seeing a situation whereby we have very many people who have forged certificates. And I'll give you a very key example so that you begin to understand the kind of revenue that the taxpayer is losing. There is a man who was employed in a state corporation, one of the key state corporations in this country. He entered in as a cadet on a fake certificate. He entered in with a fake Form 4 certificate and a fake degree certificate. Worked his way very quickly. He rose and became, I think, the personal assistant to the then managing director of that state corporation. And he was able to use his connection with the MD to secure a fully government paid scholarship to go and study for a master's degree in UK based on the fake documents that he had used to acquire employment. So he secured a fully paid scholarship and he was out of the country, paid for by the taxpayer. And when he came back, he was promoted. This particular state corporation has regional offices, so he was deployed to head the Great Lakes region. And it was at that point when we started undertaking investigations, that is when he quickly resigned and left. And that is just one of the cases. So you can imagine just that one person, how much money is the taxpayer losing. And these are replicated across the board. It is not just the national government, county government, it is state corporations, it is in the mainstream government. There is actually a lot of fake certificates out there. So we need to ask ourselves, what has happened to us as a nation? Where did the rain start hitting us? So moving on to the next slide, institutionalizing ethics in the public service. This is the preventive approach that we've also been employing. We undertake a lot of systems review, corruption risk assessment, and we undertake this in the national and county executive institutions and assembly. And what a corruption risk assessment is a proactive method of preventing corruption from taking place. Because what we do as a commission, we enter into an institution. And when we get into an institution, then we identify the weaknesses within the institution, within the policies, the procedures, the systems of work that facilitate corruption. And then we give recommendation in terms of revising those work methods and procedures just to make them watertight so that it can actually be a preventive mechanism. But I'll be talking about some of the challenges in terms of just implementing the reports. We have actually undertaken so many risk assessments, but in terms of implementing, then you find that there's a problem with the accounting officers and the various senior officers in terms of implementing the recommendations of the EACC, which in our view, if they're implemented, they will make a big difference. So in terms of enhancing integrity, I think you have all heard about vetting, integrity vetting, which I think is very noble. But then when you look again at the law, there's actually a very big problem because there's nothing compelling the recruiting entities to implement the recommendations of the commission. And yes, recruiting entities, we all get names, people getting into government, and we subject each and every person who's actually getting into government. They're supposed to be subjected to what we call integrity vetting. They're supposed to submit a self-declaration form to the EACC, which we undertake integrity vetting, but then you begin to see the weaknesses in the law. And then in terms of enhancing integrity, we undertake monitoring of the codes just to see the conduct. And I think this is where the biggest challenge is, because for us, the responsibility should rest with the accounting officers of those institutions, because if I'm heading an institution, I am the accounting officer, then I should be responsible within my institution to ensure that the staff that work under me adhere to the various codes and to the various norms of public service. In terms of public education, as I said, we have a lot of curricular development, outreach programs, we have integrity clubs, and a lot of training that we have been undertaking. And basically, this is really geared just to bring everybody on board in terms of understanding what are the dangers of corruption and how they can support the work against corruption. So in terms of the challenges that we face, one of the key challenges that we see as a commission is the weak legal framework. And one of the areas that there is a problem is inadequate provisions in terms of enforcing Chapter 6 of the Constitution. And I believe a number of you are aware about the initial leadership and integrity bill that had been enacted in 2011, which was mutilated. And if you recall, the Commission on Implementation of the Constitution, when the current Leadership and Integrity Act was enacted, they actually went to court because they wanted the courts to declare the Leadership and Integrity Act unconstitutional because it does not support the ideals of Chapter 6 of the Constitution. But of course, the courts did not agree with the CIC, the Commission on Implementation of the Constitution. So you begin to see that there are very many challenges. And one of the challenges, as I said, is the lack of the vetting provisions. When you look at Article 73, it is very clear in terms of vetting that one should only take up public appointments if they are persons of integrity. So how do we determine that a person is a person of integrity? And then in terms of implementing the recommendations of the EACC in terms of integrity verification, how is that to be done? Because those are the gaps that we've really been struggling with. We have gone to court to petition for removal of certain state officers. We had petitions for removal of senators, for removal of a governor, for removal of MCAs and even CECs. who in our view, we had already established that they had faked their certificates. But I can tell you it has actually been an uphill task. Some of the cases I can tell you they are still pending. And the petitions were instituted before the elections, before or just about the 2017 elections. Some of them are yet to be determined. So those are the handles at times we face. Then the corruption risk assessment, as I said, we undertake corruption risk assessments, and we're able to come up with very good recommendations for reversing some of the work procedures, methods, and policies to address the inherent corruption that is systemic. But then there is no obligation on the receiving institution, the receiving MDA, the receiving entity, to implement the recommendations of the Commission. And we've been grappling with this. We've been trying to push for amendments to the law to ensure that these responsibilities are apportioned on the accounting officer to ensure that they implement this. But that has not been forthcoming. But that is an area I know as a country that will make great strides if they were to be compelled to implement the recommendations, because they are very sound recommendations. In terms of just insufficient accountability checks, that is an area that as a country, we just need to have a conversation with, because we see that there's quite a bit of a challenge in that area as well. You know, who checks who and to what extent. The culture of impunity, glorification and reward of corrupt and unethical persons. You know, you look at the elective positions especially, and the people who are appointed to some of these elective positions. Some of them were elected when they already had ongoing cases in court. And that is also another area where we have a lot of challenges. The challenges also we've been having is especially state officers stepping aside, and I'm glad the jurisprudence that we are getting from the court is very encouraging. But for me, I don't think we even need to go to court to get a governor to step out of office the moment he's charged, or even any officer. For appointed state officers, appointed public officers, the law is very straightforward. The moment one is charged with corruption, economic crimes, then one should actually step out of office, because they need actually to step out of office until the case is hadn't determined. But then for especially the elected state officers, we have a big problem. And we have had to restore to going to court, and I think the DPP has been on the front line in this, and the ruling is there. But we've always said that it need not be in that way, in that manner. When a state officer is charged in court, whether elected or appointed, then obviously they should just step out of office until they clear their names. Then, of course, the law risk associated with corrupt and unethical practices. And to address this, I think what we are saying as a commission is we are focusing more on just clawing back the monies and the assets. And these are areas, I said, that we are posting a lot of progress. Now, weak social accountability mechanism, and I'm glad that Wanjiru Ikonyo, I think, will talk about this. I heard her say that at the beginning as she was introducing that she'll be looking at the social accountability mechanisms. So in terms of just the next slide, some of the strategies we are proposing. As a country, we need to develop a culture of upholding the rule of law. You see that there's a lot of this, whereby the leaders who are the ones who enact the law are the same people who are the first ones to break the law. So we need to actually to develop a culture and have a conversation around that. We need to demystify ethics mainstreaming as a responsibility for all. I think you find that in most cases, it's looked upon as a responsibility of just a few institutions, the law enforcement agencies, DPP and all that. But this should actually be every person's responsibility. And for us, more so, we would want to see a performance management system on ethics and anti-corruption, especially for senior officers in public service. Because if I'm an accounting officer, I'm appointed as an accounting officer and I'm accounting for the funds and the resources under my jurisdiction. I believe matters, ethics, anti-corruption, and integrity should be part of that package, and I should be able to account for that as well, for myself and for the officers under my jurisdiction. So ethical leadership, there's a challenge there, and I think we need to start seeing leaders coming up, not just saying, but leading by examples. Because you see the tone is set at the top, and even at the family level, You don't tell your children to do something that you yourself, you're not doing. If I say something, then I should be able to set the tone by doing what I am telling my children. So we have been insisting that the ethical tone needs to be set at the top. Then make corruption and ethical conduct a high-risk venture through severe sanctions, and that is what we have been pushing for. You know, if we can have more severe sanctions, then of course people will sort of feel deterred to get into it. Given that at times this can be very difficult to push through, we are focusing more on asset tracing and asset recovery. Then citizens' responsibilities, of course, election of leaders. This is where we need to work very closely with the civil society and the faith-based organizations and all the other grassroots teams, so that we can educate our people on the importance of electing leaders of integrity, because it is very costly what is happening in our country. We need to reward integrity and honest living. Integrity and honest living, they are looked down upon because of course they are not big cars, they are not big houses, but I think that is the conversation we need to start having now as a nation. Then integrity in child upbringing, character formation at the home level. I think this is very important, and that is also another sector that as a country we need to look at. How are we nurturing these children at home? How is the character formation? And I think even in schools, in universities, in colleges, and tertiary, both universities and everywhere across the board. As I said, there's a lot of problems in terms of schools because we have seen so many certificates. In fact, it's only that I didn't come with the statistics, but it is very sad. And this is an area where the government is losing a lot of money. Perhaps something else I need to say where we have also seen that there's also a lot of unethical conduct is you find that public officers are taking up two parallel employment. You find somebody is working in a public entity and perhaps in another public entity, or in a public entity and then a private entity. So you begin to ask yourself, in terms of value for money now, where do they focus on in terms of just their time and effort? And we also seen that we need to establish and uphold institutional brands of integrity and ethical organizational culture. In addition, of course, to strengthening some of the laws. Now, in terms of the key actors, I believe every person in our view is key in terms of the fight against corruption. And we have all this, the government agencies, the learning institution, and this, especially the government agencies. I think there is narrative that the EACC has to come on. It's only when the EACC goes in, it's only when they hear about the DPP and then they start being afraid. Now, why should that be? Because there's an accounting officer, there's somebody who is responsible in that institution. Those people should be held responsible. If it is the National Police Service, if it is, say, like the police, we don't need the EACC to go and police the police, because the police has a very, organized structure of command, whereby they are able to issue commands within the ranks. So these are the kind of things that we need to start asking yourself. After all, how far can the EACC be in all these institutions? We can't be in every institution. We have to look at the national, the county governments, and it is, the numbers can never be enough. Even if we were given a lot of funding by the Exchequer, the National Treasury, we'll never be have enough. We need to start thinking of something else in terms of just personal integrity and ethics. Learning institutions for us, is very key. Schools and colleges, because that is where character formation is done. Private sector, I am glad that the Bribery Act is on board. It's only that the regulations, I think, are still under development. I'm hoping that once the regulations are ready, then the private sector will begin to see them putting also measures in place in terms of prevention of corruption. Faith, religious institutions, these are very key in our society, and I think they carry a lot of clout, and we need to see more of that. The civil society, the media, yes, the media can be very effective, but basically what we're also saying that even as they're effective, I think they also need to, within their ranks, also to address the various issues that come from time to time. Professional bodies would be very key. And I think this is an area where we need to have a lot of conversation, because I think professional bodies need to come very strongly, because they have their various codes and they can actually be able to police one another. Parents, yes, and then the individual citizens. Then I'm almost coming to an end. I think my time is up. We are talking about individual responsibility, ethically conscious. We put 6 C's there. ethically committed, ethically competent, ethically courageous, ethically consistency, and ethically candid. I think as a nation, as a people, we need just to ask ourselves, what is it that we need to do? And I think it goes back to the self, the individual, because one does not need to be policed to do the right thing. And I think as integrity has been defined somewhere, that integrity is doing the right thing even when nobody is watching you. So I think those are the kind of things that we need to ask ourselves. You know, do we do the right thing only when we are being watched or when you're not being watched? And then I thought I'd have a last slide there. And I think Emily has talked about this. We have a conflict of interest bill. Perhaps Dr. Jenga will be asking whether we need another bill. Another law. And this one, what it seeks to do is to provide for management and regulations of conflict of interest among public officials. Because as Madam Emily has raised, is that actually conflict of interest is actually one of the key drivers of corruption. And when you look at the law and the various pieces of legislation in terms of conflict of interest, they are scattered in very different laws. It makes it actually very difficult to manage it. So basically what this bill has done, and this bill, by the way, is available on the EACC's website, because it was a bill that was developed through an interagency collaboration, and we subjected this to stakeholder participation. It's available on the website, you can download, but it seeks to harmonize all these many small pieces of legislation so that the responsibility and the obligation is placed on the public officer in terms of just conflict of interest, because this is an area where we need to focus on as a country. Then we are glad the BBI is looking at the centralized custody of wealth declaration. And just allow me 2 minutes just to talk about wealth declaration and why in its current form, it can never support the war on corruption. When you look at the legal regime in terms of wealth declaration, we have so many entities that have been designated in law as the custodians of the wealth declaration. I'll give you an example. Public Service Commission is the custodian of all wealth declaration forms of public officers working in ministry and in state corporations. TSC is the custodian of all teachers' wealth declaration. Judicial Service Commission is the custodian of all declaration under the Judicial Service Commission. Parliament is the custodian of their own declarations. Come down to the county levels, the county public service boards are the custodians of the wealth declarations of the public officers working in counties. When you come to the county assembly, we have the MCA's wealth declarations. In all, we have 24 entities at the national government level, hosting different wealth declarations. At the county government level, I think there are over 94. Now, these entities do not have the capacity to undertake content analysis and verification. So much as the idea of wealth declaration is noble, you find that the law then defeats the purpose for which the wealth declaration was actually put up. And best practices world over is that the wealth declaration need to be hosted in one entity, an entity that has the capacity to undertake content verification and content analysis because of a period of time. One needs to see, what has Lucy declared this year? What did she declare when she entered government? But now the challenge is, I go to Public Service Commission as an investigative agency. I want a certain declaration. I am told it is not here because Lucy, first of all, worked with the TSC. Then she came and worked here. Then now she's in the county. So basically, you are chasing all these documents all over. And if there's no content verification and content analysis, then you find that this wealth declaration regime, much as it's so noble, it cannot actually support the war against corruption, but it would be very, 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 very effective if we had a centralized custody of all the declaration of public officers. But now the BBI is proposing that the EACC becomes the custodian of the wealth declaration of the state officers who are designed under Article 260. For us, we are saying all of them, because I think it is important that they're under one body. And if KRA can do all the tax analysis for all the Kenyans, I think one entity can also manage the word declaration in terms of over 700 officers. Then that way you'll be able to see a lot of things coming through, because you're able to raise red flags, you're able to go after officers, you're able to start questioning public officers. How did you get this? Where is this? Where are these assets from? When did you, is this from legitimate sources? So basically we need an investigative agency to handle that. Just to mention some of the challenges in terms of the wealth declaration. Otherwise, in terms of the legal proposals, those are some of the legal proposals we are looking at, I think, in addition to what Emily has indicated. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I have rushed through. Actually, that was my CEO's presentation, but I'm glad that I have this opportunity to interact as we go to plenary. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Kinuthia. You've covered a very broad context. You gave an introduction, talked about key legislation, mandates of the EACC, and tackled various dimensions. So you talked about issues of enforcement, challenges, strategies, key actors, individual responsibilities. You highlighted those 6 C's, and then you finished off with this idea of reform proposals. We thank you for that, and it sets the stage for this next part of the conversation. So we've initially heard from 2 experts, 2 institutional perspectives, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, as well as the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Dr. Njenga set the stage from an academic perspective. We'd now like to come back and hear from our panel. And I'll introduce our esteemed panel. I'll ask them to turn their videos on. Ms. Wanjiro Gikonyo, Dr. Thomas Kibua, and Dr. Miriam Omolo. I'll just highlight something small about each of the 3. And as I'm doing that, I'll invite the 3 panelists in about 5 minutes. But just in the interest of time, we've got about 40 minutes together where we'll hear from you. We'll also open the floor to the participants. Several have already been posing questions, and we'll fill this to you and the 2 key speakers. So I'll start with Ms. Gikonyo, who's a national coordinator at the Institute for Social Accountability, TISA. She's a strong advocate for participatory local governance in Kenya, has over 15 years experience in social accountability advocacy practice. She has widespread experience in participatory governance, decentralized governance, social audits, local budget tracking, legislative and policy monitoring, and advocacy. And she's the founder and the national coordinator of TISA, which has been instrumental in advocating for effective devolution and meaningful public engagement under devolved government in Kenya. Ms. Gikonyo, why don't I start with you and get your reaction in about 5 minutes to everything you've heard from the keynotes and Dr. Njenga this afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Mbaya, and it's an honor to be here. I'll try and keep it brief. I had prepared for 10. I'll do my best. I have 4 or 5 points to make. First is that the prevailing context in which we are working makes it very difficult to build a culture of ethics in public service. So as we have this conversation, we need to keep an eye on the politics. And I draw this from a UNDP report prepared in 2015 on the public sector reforms program that was run under the NARC administration under the ERS, the Economic Recovery Program. And some of the lessons that this program brings out is that at that point, Kenya's had public service sector reforms for a long time, but the ERS made a difference in putting public sector reforms as a key driver of economic growth and democratic governance. And they introduced several of the tools that are used today, the performance contracting, rapid results initiative. But this program focused a lot on behavior change. So the approach was not just the institutional, but also recognizing you need to work on behavior change. And the program stressed that political context, political leadership are very important. These were the lessons they learned. They also learned that local governance reforms are critical, effective decentralization, the empowerment of citizens, effective partnerships with stakeholders. At the peak of this program, we were actually able to have civil society roundtables with the government about public sector reform, about accountability, about the state of devolution. So the extent to which the administration is not paying attention to these issues, prioritizing political leadership, decentralization, citizen empowerment, engagement with civil society, undermines the ability of building ethics. So that's the first reflection. The second one is looking at government's own reports. I looked at the Kenya National Commission Human Rights Jubilee Scorecard. KIPRA has an evaluation report on the national values and principles of governance because there's a sessional paper of 2013. So they have an evaluation they conducted also in 2015. And then there is the public service report of 2019, looking at compliance with the values and principles of Article 10 and Articles 232. And they found that public sector compliance is at 42.4%, which is relatively low. It could be encouraging depending on where you sit, but it's pretty low. And part of the weaknesses, and they also acknowledge other gains, are that the national values and public governance and principles of governance policies are largely enacted. Frameworks are in place. The problem is non or weak implementation, human rights violations. Also recognize the failure to implement the Truth and Justice Reconciliation Committee recommendations, the recommendations of the National Land Report, impunity by state officers, weak management of diversity. These are some of the gaps. The report by KIPRA, by KIPRA looked at the president's annual address and said that initially this address was looking at the status of implementation of national values, but then later reports downplayed this and moved to more broad statements of intent. So it's as though government also gave up. And then also they noted the president's annual State of the Nation address is a very key driver of integrity, ethics, national cohesion, but it lacks public participation. So it's not connected to the citizen, and also implementation mechanisms are weak. So we see a recurring theme here of this lack of public engagement. So the second reflection is that the normative or policy framework for building an ethics in public service already exists. The gap is in implementation. When we come to implementation, I'd like to look at this this problem because I think it's coming through from all the speakers, and this is a big crisis that we are dealing with in this country. Why this culture of non-implementation? There was a very good report published last year by AFRICOG looking at state culture, state capture. And I'd like to, before I talk about this briefly, just reflect on something Professor Peter Wanyande wrote, and quite a few people, of course, have written about this, but he had a very good quote that really stuck with me, that Kenya is in the throes of a long drawn-out democratic transition process characterized by resistance by the old order versus the new. I've paraphrased. So when we talk about this ethical, lack of ethics, lack of integrity, we need to contextualize it in part of the democratization process. And they are beneficiaries of the old order, and they are able to circumvent the mechanisms that have been put in place to create this new democratic culture. So that when we talk about it from a state capture point of view, Washira Maina, writing for AFRICOG, said, the difficulty in fighting corruption lies in the union of corruption and politics. State institutions and processes are repurposed to gut state resources for electioneering purposes to enable those beneficiaries to maintain power. And in this context, oversight institutions must be eviscerated, hollowed out. And that's why you see there's been quite an attack on the judiciary, underfunding of the judiciary, manipulation of public appointments. You have Chapter 15 institutions, and they're not able then to implement their mandate because of lack of funding. Then some key positions, you have political interference. Those put there may be very competent, but then also very aligned to the administration of the day. And to my mind, there are some dangers in the BBI process in this regard because of weakening of separation of powers and creation, you know, taking us back to this all-strong president who's able to influence appointments in key institutions of oversight. So we must, as part of the democratic process, we must fight for separation of powers. To protect the separation of powers. So this report by the AFRICOG, because I also need to speak about what can we do, this report calls on civil society to take certain measures, and it bases these proposals on the thinking that democracy retains the potential to undo state capture. So when we ask the question, what do? We need to look at what are those democratic provisions that we need to strengthen. Accountability, freedom of assembly, public interest litigation, power of recall. There are all these democratic processes that are in law, but aren't working properly. And our aim, for instance, as we talk about constitutional change, is what is preventing the exercise of the sovereign will of the people, and how do we strengthen it? Not creating, if we fail to diagnose the problem and to name it properly, we'll then get into a lot of more institutional reform, but we are really clouding the issue. We also need to remember that democratization is not a linear process. We will have gains, we will have reversals. And under the present administration, we can see for sure there have been reversals in some aspects, some gains in others or opportunities. So the report says harness collective action. And I believe this kind of conversation is very useful, where you have academia, you've got government, civil society. We need to get other non-state actors into the democratization process to speak truth to power and to keep pushing for effective democratic governance. Use opportunities in the Constitution to model good examples. Like we always talk about Makueni, and there are few other examples of effective self-governance where citizens have to sign off on public procurement, so that the citizen is invested in their development, and the power has shifted really to that village governance, that ward level governance. Unlike what we have with a lot of devolution and the national government is a process of re-centralization. So the power hasn't shifted and citizens are not empowered. They do not really have a say. We also need a civil society to strengthen our evidence generation, maybe more effective partnerships with academic institutions in this regard. And this evidence is for accountability, for public interest litigation, so that we can also hold officers to account and help the process of prosecuting these officers. And also strengthening mechanisms of social sanction, because the prosecutorial system can only be so effective. It can only deal with a few cases, but through social sanction, using evidence, so that citizens themselves can sanction their leaders. We also need to leverage the constitutional reforms opportunity under BBI. Much as we are very unhappy about its present framing, we must remember that the present constitution also started from a similar political process that was possibly masking a lot of political interest, but through robust stakeholder engagement, we got a very progressive constitution that's not perfect, but we can anchor for reform. So my last point is, one of the key things that we have found the key disconnects is the philosophical. In terms of, we've really been driven into a lot of technical conversations, tools, methodologies, processes, and then we forget what is this about. So democratic governance, what are the philosophical underpinnings that we need to focus on? And I'd like to say that when we're talking about ethics, for instance, one of the recommendations of the KIPRA report, and I've heard it also mentioned here, Dr. Jenga also mentioned it as he was opening, was that we need to reteach ethics, you know, go back into the family, go back into the school curriculum. BBI says this, the KIPRA report says this, but we need to be very careful as we say this. And I'll say why I'm concerned. And the BBI approach is very centrist and I'm sure well-intended, but we need to ask who should be driving this education and what are the philosophical underpinnings of this education? And of course, then what's the content? And in terms of who, if we look at the history, for instance, of civic education, the most successful civic education program run in this country was a partnership of government with civil society actors. Religious were there, civil society, the traditional civil society was there, and developed the Uraia program, which was then turned into an institution. But you know, the initial was really framed on non-state actors coming and saying, this is what we understand about public participation. The K-NICE program that was then crafted later I believe it would have been in the post-election time, completely missed the mark because government re-centralized. So we really need to be careful when we are trying to reform bad habits of politicians and of the state can then not be the one that designs the civic education program for us. As civil society, actually, we have moved to political education, and the state will not be comfortable with this. So we need a safe space where we can discuss how do we do civic education for transformation, you know, really anchoring it in liberation theology, in critical consciousness, really talking about transformative education. So these are the philosophical underpinnings that will challenge the over-centralization of power. And if you go back to the African Charter on Public Participation, and this charter was then, you know, these principles have then been put into the, I think it's a 2013 Charter on Democratic Governance, the UN Charter. It really looks at the need to decentralize power. And I'll just get a quote, and I know I'm running out of time. I'll just read this quote quickly,
about 30 seconds.
as my last thought. The over-centralization of power is a key impediment to the effective participation of people in their social, political, and economic development. And from where we sit, and if you look at the readings, when you alienate people from their development, you create apathy, they lack self-determination, and the antidote is empowerment. So we need an education in empowerment, and I think I will rest my case there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I actually let you complete all the thoughts you had, those 5 points, because it sets the stage nicely from both a cultural and a social perspective. And I'll come to a closing round when we'll have comments from the two key speakers and the panelists, and you'll be able to build on that. I wanted to bring in Dr. Kibua, who's our senior faculty member here at the Business School. Dr. Kibua, you're a renowned expert in development economics, governance, management, which includes public finance, management, and institutional building. You've consulted extensively and also worked within government, private sector, non-governmental organizations. You were previously a deputy governor at the Central Bank of Kenya between 1993 and 2001, and also an executive director in the Institute for Public Policy Analysis and Research, 0308. And more recently, I know you work closely with the county government of Makueni and sit on the board of Capital Markets Authority. I wanted you to weigh in on what the speakers have discussed. We've had the perspective from Wanjiro, which has focused on, I would say, the cultural and social aspects. What are your thoughts, Dr. Kibua? You have about 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Martin, for inviting me to this forum. Let me start by saying that we must all admit, in spite of what we are presenting and conversing about, that we are in a mess as a country. And with that admission, we need to figure out, first, do we understand the mess? And two, how can we lift ourselves from the mess? And I want us to remember a book we read a long time ago called The Pilgrim Progress by John Bunyan. When a person gets to a mess, and they cannot just sort themselves out, they need some kind of intervention which will pull them out somehow. And the reason I say that is we are dealing with a systemic problem that affects all sectors and all processes. For example, if you look at the way we do our budgeting, and most of us tend to discuss corruption and bad ethics with respect to budget execution and accounting, just two things. It is that, budget execution, budget accounting, where we get all the mess. But I want to put on the table that it is actually a larger problem than that. The corrupt behavior and the unethical behavior starts from the policy formulation. The policy formulation, the planning, the budgeting, the budget execution, the accounting, the reporting, the monitoring, and the evaluation. And if you look at it that way, then you can imagine why we are unlikely to win this war very quickly until we look at that system of things. To know something that becomes budgeted for must have come from a policy position and must have come from a plan and a program and a project before it is budgeted for. And then we execute that budget. And then that execution must lead to a result. And many times we don't ask about the result that we intended to get. So we tend to have that narrow view of where unethical behavior falls. Number two, we have the interconnectedness of society, starting from leaders, and I hear, the issue of a corrupt political system. The whole issue of the international community is not clean. The whole issue of the faith-based organization, the NGOs, the marketplace, everybody, the private corporations, all these people are not clean. And we can sit here and beat the public sector until we all fall dead, and the problem will still continue. Because the entire society, the entire fabric of society, whether we are looking at the political leadership, whether we are looking at corporate leadership, whether we are looking at faith-based leadership, is purely corrupt, basically. And I've tracked this thing for the last 10 years. All of them, including the media, or everybody is involved in this matter. So, in other words, what we are talking about is a universal participation in a certain communion of things. And this universal participation starts from the top to the bottom. That's why you find the chief in the village is asking for bribes. That's why you find the policeman on the road is asking for bribes. That's why you find the minister is asking for bribes, and everybody. That's why you see all these leaders are making hay out of where they didn't sow. So it is this complicated universal participation that we need to deal with. And I like what George Jenga said at the beginning. We need to re-examine our morals, because we have completely gotten into the space of moral decay. Public morality is no longer an issue. Everybody does whichever they want to do. And then there are these compounding factors of the problem of poverty, inequality, and an unequal society where there is dualism, the haves and the have-nots. And the group of the have-nots is increasing. And the group of haves is doing very little to uplift the group of the have-nots. So we have this compounding factor of inequality. Then the shadow economy, the economy that is unregistered, unregulated, untaxed, growing as a big sector of the economy. We have the complexities introduced in our systems by the revolution in ICT, the revolution in the financial sector dynamics, the revolutions in international trade, and all sorts of things. And we have to face these things squarely. Now, two things emerge. One is what we call the transactional issues. The transactional issues is where people are exchanging money and there's a price. There's a price for a project. There's a price for a tender. There's a price for all sorts of things. And that is what most of these players fighting corruption have been dealing with, the transactional issues. But there is also the behavioral issues. And the behavioral issues are as important as the transactional ones. For example, you walk to Kenyatta National Hospital, you will not find a doctor there. They are all across the Kenya Medical Association building treating other people there. You go to schools and you don't find teachers, and somebody talked about absenteeism from various positions. You go to parliament and you find no members of parliament there. They don't attend the meetings. And there is this general problem of behavioral things. You go to the courts, find that the files are lost and there are clerks who are in charge of it and nobody bothers. You go to the roads and they find the road engineers who approve the road has been done well. And in 2 months it has potholes. And there's this behavioral issue that we never think about and we never jail people for. So then there are facilitators, the bankers, the accountants, the lawyers, the engineers, the planners, and other professionals. When we talk about ISPAC and we talk about the Institute of Engineers, we talk about this institute and the others, they are part of this scheme of cooking books and the cooking reports and the signing that these are professionally done. So these facilitators, we need to bring them on board also and think about them. So that's the first sector I want to make a comment on. The second sector I want to make a comment on is what are the foundation? What is the foundation? What are the determinants of these problems? And I found 5 determinants. First is the corrupt political system, the leadership deficiency. You know, we bring these people, and a long time ago, I wrote a paper on campaign financing, and the people ignored it. Campaign financing, where you're buying votes and you're doing all sorts of things, you elect the corrupt fellows, they come and put laws that are deficient or they mutilate them because they may be caught. Number 2 is a whole issue that I think it was Emily who mentioned about it. The whole issue of that 1971 Dewa Commission, which had many good things, but had one very bad thing, which said public servants can engage in business. So what happened? They started engaging in business where they are working. The conflict of interest we are talking about. And we have refused to revisit that Dewa Commission recommendation. Number 3 is the whole issue of an harmonized remuneration of the public sector. You know, the salaries, the wages, and whatever you call them. You see, there is no merit a professor working in a public university being paid 1/3 of what an MCA who never went to a university is earning. There's no merit. There's no merit. The reason there is competitive politics is because the price is very good. The return from political power is very good. So if we were to reduce this political reward to 200,000 shillings per month, for example, no other benefits, there will be very few people wanting to contest for political seats. But you know, we have refused to deal with this kind of issue to harmonize the remuneration in public service and implement it, you know, because the people who are supposed to make these are also interfering because they are beneficiaries. The 4th thing is inequality in society with respect to access to opportunities, access to health, access to education, access to housing, access to security, access to all sorts of things. You know, why should there be one Alliance High School where everybody is trying to bribe the teachers to get good marks to go to Alliance? Because we have refused to equalize the situation to have alliances in every village. We don't post the best teachers everywhere. So we need to think about why people are bribing, are buying examinations. People are selling, staffers are selling these examinations. It's because of the inequality in opportunities. A land of equal opportunities, everybody has access to a certain minimum threshold of health, of education, of security, of housing, of water, etc. So we need to think about that. Then the last thing, with respect to the determinant, is the whole issue of this destructive entrepreneurship and the competition that we have brought into our society, based on an economic system that is very competitive, cutthroat kind of thing, and we need to re-examine that to say, look, why is it that everybody is so money-driven, so materialistic, that they can kill anybody to access material opportunities? Now, having said that, point number 3 is the progress made in the last many years fighting this problem is very commendable, and I like the presentations from Emily and from Lucy. I think they have tried their best, but unfortunately, the success rate will continue to be very low. They have created very good frameworks, policy frameworks, created very good institutional and legal frameworks, very good regulatory framework with the laws and everything. They have made a lot of operational efforts. The question then, although the efforts are uncoordinated, like Lucy mentioned, and sometimes they have challenges, the bottom line being we have adequate toolkit. The toolkit for fighting corruption is adequate. We don't need to create more laws. We don't need to create anything more. We don't need to create more institutions, in my view. The toolkit is there. We know everything. So the question we should be asking ourselves, why is it that the toolkit is not effective? And that brings me to my last comment, which is, what do we need to do? The solution. And I want to offer two ways of doing it. The first one is the short term. The short-term solutions. The short-term solutions is to continue the things that Lucy and Emily are doing, to continue the things that everybody is doing to fight this problem, to know that this problem is everywhere in society, in every sector of the economy, in the private sector, in the public sector, and everywhere. So we continue. We are doing very well. But the second thing is looking at the long term. And the long term requires that we really shake the foundation. That's the only solution from where I sit. We need to shake the foundation. How do we shake the foundation? George Nyaga mentioned one thing, go back to the basics. And I think Lucy repeated the same. And I think Wanjiru also repeated the same. Let us go back to the basics. But you see, going back to the basics to build public morality is not easy, because we have a generation which is already polluted. And that polluted group of leadership and all of us who are in that space may find it very difficult to bring in new public morality. But let us assume that's one of the things we should do with respect to the long term. The two other things that I want to suggest with respect to the long term is we must all agree there is the need and the urgent need for us to fix the electoral system, the political system. Until we fix the political system, figure out why the politics will be that competitive, what it is that it makes people want to go there, why we produce leaders. Of course, Wanjiru is saying the society must be involved there. But it's a pricing system. We have priced it wrong. We need to change the price of politics. We need to reward it much less than other endeavors, and then we see what people do. And finally, this economic system that we have built based on high voltage competition, based on destructive entrepreneurship, that you can cut Martin's nose and go and sell it so that you make money. We need to rethink about it, to figure out how do we create an inclusive economic architecture that benefits the Wanjiko on the street, that benefits everybody almost equally. To do that, we may need to rethink the size of government. I think we have created too large a government. And when we evolved, we even decided government should be much larger. I think we need to reconfigure. There are many things that the government should not be doing, and those are the places where corruption resides. If you listen to the parastatals, where the biggest corruption is. They are the commercial parastatals, because that's where the money is. So we ask ourselves, why should the government be producing meat, KMC? Why should the government be producing maize in Tana River? Why should the government be producing sugar? That can be done by others, and the government should regulate, should tax, should give guidelines. I thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Kibua. And you've tackled what broadly I can call corruption. So we heard of the social cultural perspective from Wanjiro. Your area collectively I can call corruption, and we appreciate that. And I'll give Dr. Omolo the last word. Dr. Omolo, we actually constrained on time, the 5 minutes for everybody, and the 15 minutes has grown. So this was a very difficult topic to tackle in 2 hours. Dr. Njenga, you oblige us, maybe at a later date, we'll get a chance to unpack this in even greater detail. So Dr. Omolo, in about 5 minutes, we'll figure out. Dr. Njenga, I'll give you the last word. I'll just introduce you. You're the founder executive director at the Africa Policy Research Institute, and you're also a faculty member at the business school. And you have spent over 14 years of research experience in development economics, poverty, welfare analysis, trade and development, emerging extractive sector, and asset management. And you've previously worked in the Institute of Economic Affairs and the Africa Economic Research Consortium. You also consult for the World Bank on asset management within a devolved system of government. So a very, very strong perspective on economics. I'll give you the last word, just in the interest of time, because we have a hard stop at 4:30. And for those who have joined us, let me just make the comment. For those who will need to drop off at 4:30, thank you very much for being able to join us, but do stay on so that we can hear from Dr. Omolo. And then I'll invite Dr. Njenga to give the last word. Dr. Njenga gave all the panelists and the 2 keynotes a lot of time to be able to speak. I'll give you the last word. And Dr. Njenga will also read some of the questions we got. And I'll beg you, maybe in future we'll have another opportunity where we can tackle this topic. I think there was a lot of meat we underestimated. So Dr. Omolo, we start with you, then Dr. Njenga, you can prepare to close for us. Dr. Omolo?
Thank you very much, Martin. Being the last presenter, I have the advantage of picking the key points from the previous presenters, but there's a disadvantage of talking very quickly. So in my case, I was looking at a few issues relating to the challenges, and I'm going to try and make sure I wrap up in 5 minutes. Now, Dr. Njenga talked about this and all the previous panelists. There are very many legislations, and we don't need any more. But you can see from an economic perspective and someone who's worked a lot in public finance, that these laws do not guarantee goodwill in the implementation, because the laws are not an end in themselves. The objective is for us to get public service delivery. Ethics, even as we are discussing here, is not an end in itself. It is supposed to be helping us in ensuring this effective public service delivery. But that is still lacking, and we can see it's lacking. A good example is we've had the debate on the division of revenue between the national and county governments. And that took over almost a year because the revenues are discussed by the Commission for Revenue Allocation. They did their work on the 4th, I think, formula last year. It took almost a year, if I can say, for the Senate to reach an agreement. And I'm not sure how well they've reached an agreement yet. So you can see the laws are very clear, but there is no goodwill. So where are our values? That's a major challenge. Then the second one has been talked about, I'll gloss over it, the conflict of interests. And there are very many interests. We point out to government, and particularly the public sector. But when you go to interactions between media and government, a lot needs to be answered in terms of values. There's a lot of corruption, so that even where corruption cases are there, they are muffled. Private sector players are no better. than public sector. A lot of bribing goes on and even violation of human rights. NGOs are very good at talking about human rights, but even within NGOs are interactions with government as well. You find there are cases where you ask yourself, where is the ethics? So ethics has largely focused on the public sector, but not on interactions with other players as well. So that remains a major challenge that we really need to look at. And one challenge that was talked about by the ESCC, which I would like to add on, was the low risk associated with corruption. The reason why there are low risks associated with corruption is because the laws of economic crimes are not there. You find, if you look at the BBI report, they talked about expediting cases in the courts. But if we had specific economic crimes which are prosecuted or a special court, and there's enforcement, that's an area that can really curb corruption. But of course, that is now one of the solutions, but not a long-term solution. I would like to look at some of the roles that other sectors, particularly the non-state actors, can play. The first part of it is, we've talked about accountability in service provision, and I know TISA is very active in issues of accountability, but several civil society organizations have been working on social accountability. And if this process is institutionalized through development of the citizen report cards and the community scorecards for different sectors of the economy, I think that would be a very good starting point of how to link ethics and service delivery, because those two do not work in isolation. The universities play a very critical role, and I'll give an example. We have the theory, what we are taught in class, we have the practicals, then we have ethics. As an economist and a statistician, we were in class and we were taught about tallying. Tallying, what happened is that you have the 4 sticks, you cross with the 5th stick, and you tally like that. But the unfortunate thing is that we were never taught the problems of tallying, and we saw it cost Msando his life when you start tallying and ICT. So I think the issues of ethics should be incorporated in all subjects in the university and how it affects you in your area of work. That's an area that even the Strathmore Business School can take advantage of, because there is a major weak link. ESCC is talking about cost effectiveness. Is about asset recovery. I think some of the roles the university can play is the cost effectiveness of that, so the asset recovery initiatives. We were not given the numbers of how much is recovered, but what is the cost of recovering them? The cost of recovering them should also include the penalties for recovering them from the owners who've been associated with corruption. Then there is the role that is very important here when we are talking about value.
Okay, I think we might have a...
And I think, and the chart, the other religious organizations, you notice that before...
Oh, Dr. Omola, we might be facing a connection issue from your end.
Hello?
Yes, okay. Yeah, just try now. You might try switch off your video, just see if the quality will be good as you finish the thought. I think we lost Dr. Omolo. Yeah, okay, that's okay. So what I'll do, I'll give her thoughts. Dr. Njenga, you can prepare yourself. I'll give you the last word. There were a set of questions, and I think several of them have been addressed. How best can EACC strengthen anonymous reporting of corruption in public service and in the previous sector? That's from Chris Oye, Derek Odemba. Don't we have a way through which the relevant employing agencies in government can ascertain authenticity of documents with relevant institutions such as KNEC, professional bodies, learning institutions before employing a person. Anthony Bundy, at the moment, who holds a moral authority in the eyes of the public to speak on ethics? Have we lost the moral ground to political discourse, which is not always a true north? Hassan Emoy, some design of policies, legislation of public service inhibits ethics and integrity, such as the County Government Act. The CC's office, the office is useless. The governor runs the show. Many professionals left jobs in order to come and work. What are different ways that some of those challenges can be addressed? And then from somebody who called themselves humanitarian, question to EACC, is there a law that requires persons to get into public office to get clearance from EACC? So similar to the earlier question. I want to use that just in the interest of time.
Okay,
we won't be able to. Okay, Dr. Omolo, it's okay.
Yeah.
I use that window just to set up Dr. Njenga. So Dr. Njenga, in your closing remarks, we won't have a chance to hear from everybody in the interest of time. As the Executive Dean, I'll give you executive privilege to waive that if you so choose. But let's hear from Dr. Omolo. Any remaining final thoughts? The beauty is this session is being recorded, so we'll be able to edit and piece everything together. Go ahead, Dr. Omolo, and then Dr. Njenga will close for us.
I think I'll just give the final point. I was going to talk about the role of the religious bodies, because you notice that when we approach elections, everyone is running to the church or to the mosque. So these people are in charge of our souls, mind, emotion, and will. This is where we can start changing our values, because these are people we listen to and we tend to believe them. So close working relationship of the two organizations, the Office of the DPP and the EACC with the religious bodies is very important. But also where we influence our values are the schools. Let us not ignore the ECD, the early childhood education system, the primary schools, secondary schools, and even post-primary. Curriculums can be developed at this point on values and ethics, governance, and how public service works. I think because of time, I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Dr. Omolo. I think you left exactly at a good note what institutions beyond the public sector can do. Dr. Njenga, we've had a very amazing set of keynote speakers. We've had a fantastic panel that has tried to dissect this conversation. Dr. Omolo finished off with what I would call ethics. So Wanjiro spoke about culture, society, Kibua spoke about corruption, and then between Madam Kamau and Ms. Kinuthia, we got two very different institutional perspectives. You've had all the questions. Let me put everything back to you just to wind up for us and help us contextualize this, map the way forward, and maybe speak on behalf of all the actors, just in the interest of time, since we only had 2 hours. Karibu, Dr. Njenga.
Thank you. I want to thank Wajiro, Omolo, Emily Kamau, Lucy, and Kibua. Thank you very much for the discussion. It was beautiful. We don't have a full solution, but I'll summarize the ideas into 3. The first is leadership and the democratic process. There, the issues have been articulated very much. So I'll summarize by saying that when you do not have a vision towards what your country should look like, when as a leader, and I'm not talking about the president, I am talking about all the people who have been given public service responsibility. When they cannot see the vision, then they will not lead the people towards that vision. Further, if they are corrupt, they will not see the effect of their corruption on the destruction of that community. So a democratic process that is based on money ends up serving money. And that is what we call a tyranny. That is what we call an oligarchy, where families, significant families, take control of all the resources of a country to the detriment of the civilized civility or civilians, or what we call the citizens of the country. And so I would say that it is time our leaders gave a concrete vision of what our country needs to look like and the effects of corruption on that vision. Because then it can move us towards acting positively towards sustaining the community. It's like this. If a father is corrupt, the family falls. If a mother is corrupt, the family falls. So how is it that we imagine that if leaders are corrupt, the country will not fall to the hands of brigands, which is what has happened? So there's something to talk about there about leadership and democracy. I finish it there. And really, we don't have a direct solution, and we have borrowed it from our partners and international partners, bilateral, multilateral partners. I think it's time we really thought about that as a nation, and it is not a short thing or a simple thing to do. The other thing is basic, because all of you have mentioned it. How is it that we say we have a democratic process, but there is no accountability process to the public? So if you go to the ministries and executives and political responsibility, accountability officers, I don't want to go into the details. How do we report back to the population? And how can we create a demand side where people ask for accountability of the public funds? Again, when you communicate and disseminate information, people are aware of what is happening, and therefore they ask for accountable leaders. But if you don't account and you cheat them, and we don't have a system for doing that, then it's over, because you can hide anything under Sirikali equals to Serekali. Everything is secret. And indeed, there are certain things like security that need to be secret. You cannot reveal certain issues of security and economy. Then the last thing, ethics and law. This has been overemphasized. However, build institutions that last. Because if you don't build institutions that last, and especially the judiciary and the legislature, in terms of creating an environment of ethics and trust. But as you can see, it's linked all the way back to leadership and democratic process. You make people go to parliament and to Senate and to all leadership positions based on money, and they're the ones who are going to legislate against corruption. So you're caught in this fight and battle, okay? Something we really need to think about, but the solution is not in more law. In fact, my opinion is what Lucy said, integrate the law. However, it would be risky to leave only one person in charge of that law, because that person becomes then the dictator, given the fact that. So is there something about public and private sector accountability mechanisms for public funds? Do they have a place? Can they be given a law? Do we have community accountability meetings that look at the full freedom of the public funds and say something about it and demand results? And they are part of the legal structure of the country to ask for accountability. Because now if the public cannot ask, if the public cannot seek, if the public cannot check and scrutinize, then how are the public servants going to report back to them? And with that, ladies and gentlemen, ultimately we are building a country. So whereas I do realize the complexity of the problem of corruption, both locally and internationally, it's only we who can leave a legacy for our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Njenga. We've run 12 minutes over time. I sincerely apologize to all our participants, but I'm delighted to note about 60 or 70% have stayed until the very end. So congratulations and thank you very much to all our speakers, the panelists and the keynotes, Ms. Lucy Kinuthia, Madam Emily Kamau, Wanjiro Gikonyo, Dr. Thomas Kibua, and Dr. Miriam Omolo, led by Dr. Njenga. This marks the end of our session today. Dr. Njenga, I've seen a comment in there asking or indicating we are very keen to attend the sequel. So I think tumepeana appetizer And Miss Lucy Kinuthia, Madam Emily Kamau, you will please send our regards to Bwana CEO and Bwana Director of Public Prosecutions, as well as Dr. Njenga as our Head of Institution. There's a desire for more. So I will leave that challenge and look forward to the next session. Carol, who's overseeing our communications, there was a request for the slides to be shared, as well as this video. I want to believe those will be available. And for Miss Emily Kinuthia, I believe we'll be able to share the slides you had given us. With that, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Panelists, kwaherini, and all the best. And thank you for your very wonderful insights. Goodbye, everybody.